Over the past few weeks and months, like many of you, I have been angry, grieving over the violence against the Asian Pacific Islander or the API community, my community. I want to thank this board for your unanimous support for the two hate crime state bills that the API caucus introduced, which we took a position on earlier today. That means a lot to me. We've seen the news, we've seen the headlines and the visceral images and reminders that racism against Asians and Pacific Islanders is present and an everyday part of reality for people who look like me. We saw the Chinese grandmother, Paw Paw, who fought back after being assaulted on Market Street, a stone's throw from our BART stations. This resolution cites Stop AAPI Hate, a new nonprofit founded right here in San Francisco last year by several organizations, including Chinese for Affirmative Action and SF State's Asian American Studies Department. And they found that there have been 3,800 instances of discriminatory acts, hate speech, and violence against the API community between March 2020 and February 2021. I strongly believe this hate against the API community has festered as a relic of our nation's racist history, which unfortunately our former president incited further with his anti-Asian rhetoric. We have so much work to continue doing to reconcile our country's history and repair harms of the past and even current generations. I'm grateful that our current president, Biden, aside from being a really big fan of trains, had this to say, quote, "Too many Asian Americans have been walking up and down the streets and worrying, waking up each morning the past year, feeling their safety and the safety of their loved ones are at stake. They've been attacked, blamed, scapegoated, and harassed. They've been verbally assaulted, physically assaulted, killed. The conversation we had today with the AAPI leaders and that we're hearing all across the country is that hate and violence often hide in plain sight. And it's often met with silence. That's been true throughout our history, but that has to change because our silence is complicity. We cannot be complicit. We have to speak out. We have to act." So I want to be clear, as I said before, that we cannot address and put an end to racism against the API community at the expense of other communities of color. While this resolution focuses on the API community because it's important to do so, there is so much work to be done to ensure the API community continues to be in solidarity with Black, Indigenous, and other people of color. This is why I have talked with BART's general manager, Bob Powers, and BART police chief Ed Alvarez to discuss BART's role in rejecting all racially motivated violence, including violence against the API community, and what BART can do to really make sure we are upholding the safe transit policy approved by the board in 2017, which affirms BART's commitments to make our system, quote, "an inviting, equitable, and safe community for everyone who uses our system," end quote, and further oppose, quote, "hate, violence, and acts of intolerance," end quote. This resolution is a result of those conversations. I am particularly grateful for BART's increased commitments to language access, something that is incredibly important to the monolingual API community. I look forward to working with Maceo Wiggins, the head of our Office of Civil Rights, and Chief Ed Alvarez to improving our language access, especially to the API community. And you might wonder, why on earth does this matter to BART? Unfortunately, many acts of violence against the API community, as we've seen in the news, happens in our public spaces. And BART, this could be a venue of this hate. Fortunately, I've asked staff to really look into whether there has been an increase of violence against the API community. I think is a tribute to the work that our BART Police Department has done and our BART staff has done, that there has actually been a decrease over the last about 2.5 years in terms of crimes against persons who identify as Asian or Pacific Islander. And I was grateful to find that out, and that our API community, our riders, based on our recent customer satisfaction survey, do not feel any more or less safe versus the average BART rider. So with that said, I still feel this resolution is incredibly important today, and I really hope to have the unanimous support of our colleagues. And I just have one amendment to the language, which was truly my own oversight in drafting and reviewing the resolution, which is to make sure that all instances of Asian American Pacific Islander, or AAPI, is replaced with Asian Pacific Islander, or API. I am an immigrant myself from Hong Kong, and although I've naturalized as an American citizen, I acknowledge that many BART riders may not identify as American or be American citizens. So I would like to move that this item, this resolution, with that amendment. And lastly, I really want to give Maceo Wiggins many, many thanks for working on this resolution, and really making sure he was including the strongest language possible to condemn hate against the API community.